Coming up today on the show, one of my favorite guests, one of my favorite podcasters, one of the most prolific Seahawk podcasters out there. You'll know if you've ever seen one of his live streams that I know what I'm talking about. Brandon Cain of the Hawks Nest joins me. We're going to break down all of his thoughts on the offseason so far, what kind of vision he sees Mike Macdonald putting together as he shapes this roster alongside general manager John Schneider. And then we're going to dive pretty deeply into the roster itself. Are there any free agent guards out there that he likes? You might not like the answer to that. What type of player are they looking for on the interior offensive line? And then how does he feel about this draft class? Which direction does he think the Seahawks will go? Which direction does he want them to go? And who specifically he might see them taking in the first round that will surprise you without a doubt? Brandon Cain of the Hawks Nest podcast joining me next on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Happy Blue Friday as we finish out the month of March this weekend, head into Easter, and then we come out on the other side in April, which I like to refer to as NFL Draft Month. They should just make a month out of it. That would make me happy. We are getting closer and closer to the draft with each passing day. Don't blink or you might miss it. And we're going to break that down a whole lot more today with Brandon, who really spends a lot of time studying this draft and the ins and outs of the prospects. Before we get into that, if you want to support me in the show, you can buy me a coffee or a beer at the link in the description. If you prefer the audio side of things, you can listen to the show anywhere you prefer getting your audio podcast. But if you want to hear ad-free episodes, you can only do that on Spotify. It's a monthly subscription. Right now, I've got that set at less than $1 a month. That link will be down in the description as well. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that bell button for notification of new episodes and subscribe to the channel so you can follow what we do here. Let's get right into it. This is a long one, but it is worth every minute, and you'll want to stick around till the very end because Brandon gives us a curveball of a player that he really believes might be in play for the Seahawks in the middle or at the end of the first round at a position you probably don't think is a need. And it's probably, in fact, I would wager to guess that it is a player you're not thinking about, that he absolutely sees as a fit that he could see the Seahawks taking at the end of the first round. Let's get into it. This is Brandon Cain of the Hawks Nest. Back on the show once again, Brandon Cain, host of the Hawks Nest YouTube channel, Patreon. You've seen him all over the place. In fact, when I rebranded this show just over a year ago and made it Seahawks Forever, many of you came to me and said, got to have him on the show. Got to get Brandon on the show. Brandon, welcome back.
It's great to be back, Dan. Hope you're having a great offseason.
I am. And let's start there. We were talking about that before we started rolling, just how this offseason is different, not just as a fan, but as someone who does what we do. Subject lines are different. There are so many more storylines. How's this offseason been for you?
Well, it's been change that I've highly welcomed, I guess, to put it lightly. I think that it's also beyond just my own personal feeling and doing so many shows I do through the year and kind of taking a pulse of the fan base. You definitely get the feeling from them too that there's an invigoration amongst the fan base and in the feeling, and that there maybe had grown to be a bit of a stale thing there, and that a feeling that we're not really progressing. We're sort of just staying where we are. And I think that this has done a lot to sort of kind of wake everybody up a little bit with that and go, hey, you know, we're actually trying to go and be great again. We're not just happy on being merely good or kind of staying in that same place, but we're really going to drive for this now. And, you know, it's unfortunate that the regime with Coach Carroll had to wind down at the end like that and kind of come to kind of a tough stop where it's not on his own terms and just sort of like, you know, riding off into the sunset, Indiana Jones 3 style. But it had to happen, unfortunately, because these issues that were mounting were having them add to it. They weren't taking the issues away here with time. It was more issues we're adding on, even including this last year with things like such as buy-in, which used to be a thing we never used to have to question in the past when it came to Coach Carroll teams.
It certainly changes the equation when it comes to player acquisition, roster building. And now we are almost officially in draft month. And I know one thing you and I have in common is we can't get enough of the mock drafts and the simulators. Oh, yeah. You just did a long live, which is kind of your specialty the other day, where you did multiple simulations. And it's harder this year. You know, we got to know so well what, there were all the physical specs, and then we got to learn the things that the Seahawks looked for, and you could kind of identify what a Seahawk player or prospect looked like. And now there's all the unknown. What have you been able to glean so far, a couple months into the Mike Macdonald tenure of are you starting to get a feel for what he's trying to build?
I am. It's certainly going to be a big learning process, like you said, because when you have a Coach Carroll team, and when we just go to the defense specifically, you're talking cover 3 for about the first 9 to 10 years, a slight change to some cover 2 looks with the cover 3. Recent years, slight change with cover 6, implemented with some cover 2 and some cover 3, a little cover 1 mixed in. But like, you kind of knew what you're going to get. And so when you went and evaluated the all 22 tape or looked at that type of stuff, you knew that, like you said, the players, the cornerbacks for years, you had to have over 32-inch long arms, got to be over 6 feet tall. Wide receivers had to run 4.4, over 32-inch arms, got to jump 120 inches on the broad jump. I mean, they had some metrics that allowed you at times during years to just take certain receivers or certain positions, go, okay, it's a 5'10" corner. Bye-bye. You're off the list.
Spreadsheets came in handy.
Yeah, they did. And you needed to look at those metrics because they were weighty. What's changed this year is that we all have to learn kind of anew now, and what, Mike Macdonald is going to value versus what Coach Carroll valued. I think the thing that stands out to me when we look at first the defensive side, because it's both offense and defense has changed significantly this offseason. When it comes to the defense, I think if you're going to try to get to a place to kind of go, okay, let's say just general strokes, what's the main differences first before you go individually by position. And I think that's versatility, flexibility and versatility. This is a pure split safety look, in that you do require these guys, the free safety to play strong safety stuff, strong safety to play free safety stuff. This is part of the implementation we were supposed to see the past 2 years with the Vic Fangio cover 2 shell. Was this kind of stuff required? But of course the Hawks had more of type of guys at the safety position that were more fit in their box. Diggs, your single high, Jamal more better outfitted to be a box guy. And if you put him into cover 2 situations, we all saw what happened when you did that. And so this defense all across the board asks its players to play in that kind of way. Yeah, that's just the safety position, but you can apply the same thing to the linebackers positions, where a will linebacker will be asked to do Mike duties. Edges have got to get into space and on zone blitz drops and be able to cover. So what you're looking for with players is a full skill set. You've got to not be able to be a guy that's just, this is what I do, just put me over here in this role and send me down this little guided path, and that's what I'll do well in. It's like, you've got to be able to do all this relatively well. So defensively, specifically, they want the big edges that can set those edges, your Clowney types out there on rundowns, set hard edges. On that side of it, you want linebackers that can run 20, 25 yards down the field and are rangy as hell. I mean, you want to have guys that you can start at the Mike linebacker and you can have them end up as a single high safety, which he did at times with Roquan Smith, which is pretty amazing. And it's what I love about this defense. We're going from what I believe to be the most simplified defense in all of the NFL to one of the most complicated. And I think it's a big part of what can not only give Seahawks fans optimism for next year, even having a little bit of potential, but even long-term in the future, having a lot of potential, is this, in my opinion, is the main place teams have attacked the Seahawks on both sides of the ball. The predictability of the defense and the predictability of the offense. Because you can apply it over there too. The lack of running to the edges, the lack of targeting the middle of the field at the 32nd rate in the entire NFL. These are big markers that stand out to me that are easy corrections for any offense or defensive coordinator to come in that don't require brilliance. Just don't be so extreme to this one degree on a thing that doesn't really help you at all. It's not beneficial to be 32nd in the NFL at targeting the middle of the football field.
Yeah,
that becomes entirely predictable, especially tandem with the lack of running to the edges like the Hawks did, where they were way more, presumed to want to do that. So that's, I think, defensively, the main thing is just the versatility of what you ask. Same thing with the corners. Corners got to tackle in this scheme. Corners have got to be able to play deep zone and drop at times like themselves to safety looks. But it's the tackling also that's got to come into play, because you ask these guys to play that gap integrity stuff too. Everybody's got to kind of gap. They got to come in and fill. Offensively, it's going to be spread, man. This is the same thing over there. It's going completely to a different side of it. And a unique spread-based concept. Spread-based concepts tend to be dink and dunk. You're thinking, especially at the pro level, kind of your Tom Brady spread concepts with the Patriots, where everything's just tink, 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 right? He's just get the ball out of his hands, Here's a spread concepts where I think it's a little bit more, there's a little more featuring of the run, especially power concepts. But then there's more shot plays built within these spread concepts within what Grubb does. I think once every 8 plays or so, he's looking for a shot play on the college level, which is very unusual when it comes to spread, because they tend to be so predominantly locked in on that short stuff and just kind of bleeding you to death, slow but surely, which that's what I love about this scheme, is it's got a little bit more flexibility on the offensive side of the ball. And then finally, we're looking for mobile-based offensive linemen now. We got to get guys that can move in space. No more just maulers at the point of attack, but guys that can actually pull and get out in front and work the screen game.
Yeah, let's start there, because I think that's still the biggest hole that fans perceive, and I think it's warranted, is interior offensive line, especially guard. I've been pretty outspoken about, I'm team Oluwatimi. I think he's a long-term starter, may never be an all-pro, but I think he's a good, solid player, and I think the team is counting on that. I think Nick Harris was brought in to be a backup, essentially, to take that Evan Brown role. But the guard position is the one that's got people with sweaty palms. And as we look ahead to the draft and even the rest of free agency, John Schneider kind of threw a curveball at us last week when he said they had some visits lined up after the owners' meetings. Brady Henderson reported a couple of days ago he expects them to sign another veteran guard still, to kind of give us one more name to hang our hats on heading into the draft. There are some intriguing names available out on that free agent market. If you had your choice of who you'd like to see them sign, who would it be?
I don't think there's any free agents that I've been aware of at the guard position that fit to what we need at this point, being hyper-mobile guys. It was an issue last couple of years, in that we made this transition to this new offense with the Rams, which that's the requirement Waldron was supposed to be coming from with the Rams, is mobile offensive linemen. But it's a little bit like the split safety look, where we made the transition. And yes, you got Lucas and Cross, but that's kind of all you did with that onboarding of the athletic interior offensive lineman. I think with the draft being where it's at with linemen this year, and in scouting this, I think about 250 deep right now on the players in this draft coming up. This is a unique draft in that the interior offensive linemen are actually relatively deep versus what has been in prior years.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember last year, you had Osiris Torrance and Steve Avila, and then the guard position dropped off a cliff at that point.
Those guys weren't easy movers. Those were big dudes.
They weren't fits either. They were the sort of, here's your 2 good ones, and then it got down really quick last year. So the nice part to me this year is that there's a lot of good natural guards. There's a lot of guys that are playing tackle at the college level who should transition into guard. I'm fully expecting the team to, at the very least, double dip into this draft at the interior line position and find kind of the more of those mover types. And it's a necessity. I'm with you. It's a worry for me too right now. I mean, that's the big hole in this team. I like Oluwatimi, I like Bradford, but I don't think you can just 100% count and lock in on those guys and say, well, we're good at those positions now, let's just roll. I think the Hawks, it would be smart to look at situations that have been not corrected over the last 10 years. And I think the offensive line is one of those places. When Russell Wilson walked into the door, you had the most expensive offensive line in the entire NFL. And then as his time went on there, you proceeded to dial back more and more. When you started to pay Russ, you started to pay the offensive line less. That's where you sort of robbed from Peter to pay Russ. That's the way that worked. And so they've not really gone back to making that a point of emphasis. You drafted a 2nd-round center in Ethan Posick. That's as high as you've gone at the center position in 14 years. You have Damian Lewis, a 3rd-round guard. You haven't gone the 1st round, haven't gone 2nd round with the guard. Then you have this in combo with the comments from Schneider about a week ago in a press conference where he was all but talking about the fact that guards just aren't really that big of a deal, man. And like, John, come on, buddy. This is like, let's not do this again. Let's stop this. My big point of emphasis I want to see from the Hawks from a personnel standpoint this offseason was to address the offensive line and make it a point of strength for the first time in a very long period of time. I really believe in it. You have I think it was John Harbaugh was doing a presser the other day talking about what positions to value what. And I thought he made a really great point at that time about how offensive line is the one position that doesn't really require or rely on anyone else. Everyone else relies on somebody else to do something, but the line, they just go do their job and everybody else benefits it on the back end of it. And I'm a big believer in, man, I would have really loved to see this offseason, or at least in the future, them to build that unit up into a strength, because there's so many great factors. Geno plays better. DK gets better production. Kenneth Walker is going to be able to have more holes. I just did a video on Walker doing some studying on him, and with Ben looked into the splits on his runs, and when he's running in between the tackles in his career through the first 2 years, those runs the Hawks were hammering, those A and B gap runs over and over again, right? He's averaging 3.8 yards per carry. Well, he averages 5.3 yards per carry outside the tackle boxes. So, you get better blocking, better utilization of him to the edges.
Yeah.
You're going to have dynamic production from him, along with what I believe, DK and Geno with it. So I just think there'd be so many downstream benefits to doing and making this a point of emphasis.
It was fun when Harbaugh made those comments on Twitter. It was, I clicked on it, read the comments, and I think 80% of the comments were from Seahawk fans jumping in with something along the lines of, I hope John Schneider is listening to this or has seen this clip. It was teaching tape when it comes to offensive line emphasis.
Well, I got a question with you on this, because this is when I've been asking people on this, and that is, and thinking about history on this, can you, as a longtime football fan, think of any NFL team that invested heavily into the offensive line and came back a couple of years later and went, we just went too hard on this offensive line. We needed more of was receivers and running backs. God, why did we go down this route? I can't think of one instance. I can think of a lot of times where teams went, hey, we're going to go hard on the offensive line. We'll go 3 first-round picks in 4 years on the offensive line. And they got the benefits from it. That's the thing I come back to too with it, is that, hey, you get the returns on this when you put it in. It just takes the investment. You can't just keep going, we'll go 4th or 5th round guards and hope that that's where you're going to get the talented guy. When you look at those lines that have been built well, they've had to have the investment actually put into them to make it happen. Like with us right now, our best 2 offensive linemen are Lucas and Cross. First, top 10 pick and a 3rd round pick.
And I remember watching the selection of Lucas. Well, both of them actually. They take Cross at 9. I thought, oh my God, they took a tackle. We needed a tackle. They had a shot at one. There were 3 really good ones in that year's draft, and we got one of the 3. And I was happy with that. And then the 3rd round, Abraham Lucas comes up, and of course I'm a Coug, and so I was excited about that aspect of it. But I thought, am I dreaming? Did they actually just address the most important position, the one that we're lacking the most of, with 2 really good prospects? I couldn't wrap my head around it. And then, let's hope that Lucas's knee bounces back and we still get to benefit from those guys. But it's a fascinating subject that you bring up, because there was a period of time there during the time when the offensive line struggled the most, between the back-to-back Super Bowls and, let's say, 2020, 2021, when they I think on a draft pick basis, there was about a 4 or 5 year run there where they invested more picks on the offensive line than any team in football, but they just missed on them. They
were later round picks too.
Guys like Reese Odiombo and John Moffitt, guys like that just didn't. And I think Moffitt was a 3rd, but they just didn't work out. And so trying to reconcile those 2 things, where Schneider essentially spells out that he thinks you can get value later in the draft on those guys, and that the fact that it's still a need after all these years. So let me ask you this. It's, as we sit there and we're looking at 16, or whether you think, they'll trade back or not, offensive line, outside and inside, is one of the strongest position groups in this draft. I've heard it, Bucky Brooks and Daniel Jeremiah have said it's one of the strongest they've seen in 20 years. And so, when you hear John, and you can parse his comments any way you want to, he also said in that same interview that they do work positional need into their draft grade. And so, some people have dismissed his comments, his best player available comments, as, well, they don't consider need at all. He clarified that a little bit the other day. So that being said, there's some really, really good offensive linemen in the 1st round. And when you do these mock draft simulations over and over again, you're probably like me and you run different scenarios. What'll this look like? What'll that look like? How does it wind up working when you go offensive line early? And do you think at the end of the day, when they look at that board, wherever they pick their first pick, and John says top of the board's where we're going, that it's going to be an offensive lineman?
Well, it's a great question. I really think it comes down to kind of a 1-2 punch for me on this one. The first part we have to start with is kind of the quarterbacks before we get to the answer on that.
Yeah,
and the reason is,
talk about that.
Oh, absolutely. In that, not in that we need to select a quarterback, but in that I'm anticipating that there's going to be 5, maybe 6 quarterbacks taken before we pick at 16.
Yeah.
So I've been of the opinion that there's probably 10 blue chip players in this draft, 10 guys with all pro potential. Once you leave past those 10 guys and you get to 11, from about 11 to 65, you're into tier 2. Fans think of it as that there's 32 first round picks, so there's 32 first round players. Doesn't really work that way. My opinion on it is that the tier from 11 to 60, 65, 70, wherever you want to it's about right in that range. That's your tier 2 range. There's a difference once you go into that range. Those are above average players as far as their upside versus all pro versus blue chip. And why I go all the way around on this, of course, is to say if a blue chip guy slides because there's 5 to 6 QBs taken over the top, a guy that wouldn't have slid otherwise, but he slid down to you because of the blue chip side of it, I think that you got to jump on that. You can't just be, I think, in the, trade back, hell or high water, no matter what. If you get an opportunity for a blue chip guy at 16, if you get the chance to take who you think to be one of the best positional players in the draft at that point, you do so. It does make it a little tangy at that point because you're waiting all the way to the 3rd round to when you're next picking. Yeah. You're not going to be getting a guard with that 16th pick. It's probably going to be one of, it could be a Brock Bowers, it could be a Jared Verse or a Dallas Turner, an edge, or it could be a Fuanga Mims combo. I do not think Futana's in play anymore. I think he's become the second left tackle.
I saw another comment from a quote today that he thinks he's going top 10.
The only thing that was going to help him drift down to us was if he had short arms. He had 34-inch arms. He's going top 10, and his tape's better than Fashanu. Fashanu's got some mixed tape. At the end of the day, we're not taking a left tackle.
That's falling.
He is, because the tape's definitely uneven in his final year. A lot of the Penn State guys, same thing with Kalen King out there, the cornerback, just dropped off a cliff. That's sort of thing of that program a little bit. They've got some prospects, but buyer beware on some of those guys as well at times. Coming out right now, and there's been some good players, but I see some guys where I'm like,
even feel, to your point, it even feels like Chop Robinson has really been falling, and I wonder if that's tied to the fact that Penn State's had some really twitchy, athletic edge guys come out that the league has been excited about the last couple of years, and they just haven't had the production.
Yeah, and he's not. There's not the refinement, I guess, across the board on the players. Yeah. And Adisa Isaac is the same way across from. They've got 2 edges that'll come out of the draft. Isaac will probably go 2nd or 3rd round with Penn State. But yeah, just a lot of guys that are like workout warrior types. And, they've got a skill set that's hard to find, but then they don't really necessarily, when it gets to playing on the field, give you that, greatness. But I do think it's Fuaga or Mims. Now that makes things tangy because I think a lot of Hawk fans have sort of gotten on this thing of maybe we can move Lucas to guard. I don't think you can do that. I think it's going to make it a little bit, it'll make it hard if you've got to go down that road to do it. But from Schneider's perspective, he might look at a guy like Fuaga or Mims and say, I'm getting the best right tackle in this draft.
Yeah. Mims is really interesting. A guy that I've come on to lately, only 8 starts in college, but you cannot argue with the athletic profile at all. And just a guy with all sorts of upside and all sorts of ceiling.
I was late to it as far as giving him a final blue chip grade, but once you see where he's at the combine and see this, just that body style, that body type, didn't give up a single pressure or sack in those 8 starts. I mean, he was pretty monster as far as the production. So it wasn't like he had the tape's rough. He's definitely a physical dynamo, but boy, he's got a lot of technique stuff to work on. He's ready to roll. So I wish we could find a way to bump him into like a guard at that point, keeping Lucas, but he's a 6'7" cat. So you're probably going to be stuck in a bit of a predicament. Some of this is also how much Lucas's health is truly going to get better. I know that they did say that he should be ready to start by week 1, but they also mentioned the word chronic last year when talking about that knee injury.
Yeah, that whole thing's been a mystery, and Carroll didn't help out any with the way that he was kind of just, hedged evasive on any time he was tried to answer that. Let's stay with the offensive line for a little bit because this is fascinating stuff, and it seems to be, a fan favorite. That's the preference. If you put a poll up, which position do you want the Seahawks to go in the first round? I think from what I see, it would be overwhelmingly offensive line. And one fan favorite is Jackson Powers Johnson of Oregon, who really only had 1 full-time year as a starter at Oregon, and has some guard experience. He's a bigger dude, though, 330 pounds, maybe more similar to the 2 you talked about last year in Torrance and Avila than some of the guys in this draft. Just to address that, because I know so many fans favor that kid, does he move well enough to fit that profile that you're talking about?
No, it doesn't.
He's a mauler.
He's a mauler. The testing numbers indicated this. He is a really great prospect. Don't get me wrong. I like Jackson Powers, but it can't be understated that, you have guys that need to move in space. It's the reference to like go back. It's like the Broncos in the mid '90s, and sub 300-pound linemen. We got to think of it in the same kind of thing. We're not going for 290-pound linemen here, but we did sign Nick Harris, who's 290. So we are moving into a place here where it's the linemen you're going to require different body styles. And Jackson's great. I think he's much like with Joe Alt. These are your 2 high side offensive linemen in this draft, partly because they're just so young. I mean, they're just babies. So I do love his upside. He is a mauler. He's going to be a really good player in this league. Probably has the ability to play guard for a little while if you had him to have him do that until he gets slide into center, if you had that opening. But he just isn't going to move well enough in space to be able to fit to this scheme with, we're going to want to run bubble tunnel screens and get the guards out on the tunnel screens out there quick and actually land those blocks. When, I'm sure you've heard of this from many fans, but why can we run those traditional screen game over the past couple of years?
Yeah.
Why is the screen game stuck all the time? Why don't we able to run it? Well, if you go back and look at those screen plays and rewind it and watch it again, you're going to watch poor Damian Lewis out there trying his butt off to scramble out there to get to peel down on a block to a safety. And that he's got no chance. Yeah. He's not even close to getting on safety. And then the safety shoots up, or the corner gets up before the block can get there. And you're seeing the play snuffed out before it's even started. And you're going, wow, why can't we just get this done? It's like, well, you have to have those offensive linemen that go from point A to point B over to there. And so he's a legit 330 is that Jackson Powers kid. So it's just, he ain't going to be able to do that. And now you're removing plays out of your offensive playbook that are integral to making the system work.
Your thoughts on Graham Barton, guy that had a great pro day yesterday. The athletic profile's outstanding out of Duke, played left tackle, has played some center early in his career. Most project him to guard though. He would seem to be a guy that could fit that profile.
Absolutely. Definitely a top 50 player in this draft. Definitely one of the better guards in the draft. And I think he's a mover. One of the natural ways to get this done.
Or I think he clocked yesterday in the 40.
That's right. And so it's the way you at times can construct the offensive line for the mobile based stuff is because there's those Avilias and Cyrus Torrances that are coming out every year that are just not able to move. You manufacture it. And you do that by transitioning guys off of tackle to guard at the next level. Now Graham's got to do that naturally. I think he's got a little bit the shorter arms, so he was going to have to do this one way or the other, kind of regardless. But he's got the movement capability. He gives you some versatility between guard and center and being able to do that. Even a little bit of tackle in a pinch. What I like with potentially a him or a Fatanu or a Cooper Bebe is that you have guys now that you can bring in to play guard. But if Captain Chronic Knee over on the right side happens to have that thing continue to act back up again, you can pop them out in a pinch and they can hold up on that right side and you're not necessarily dropping off a cliff. I know George Fant gave us some of this redundancy with that, but you can never have too much depth at the offensive line, quality depth at that.
Yeah. Let's stay on offense for, we'll talk about one position group that might be of some importance. Then we'll switch back over to the defensive side. Let's talk about quarterback. We have to. I mean, the main subject of the beginning of the offseason was what are they going to do with Geno Smith? They reworked his contract. There was no trade market out there, if indeed they even looked into it. And then they've, in recent weeks, kind of been more definitive about committing to him, especially Mike Macdonald as the starter going into the season. Then they make the move for Sam Howell, which, we can talk about that. I'd like to get your thoughts on how you feel about him. I've been pretty outspoken about I like his upside, and I thought it was a really shrewd, savvy move to just take a shot on a guy who could turn out to be the guy. And if he isn't, you really didn't give up all that much. But we still see all this smoke, right? There was the prolonged meeting with JJ McCarthy after his pro day last week, which, doesn't look like they have a shot at him. And then yesterday, of course, Michael Penix goes out and blows up his pro day and proves to be, and we'd heard that this might happen, much more athletic than he's been given credit for. 37-inch vertical, anywhere between 4.45 and 4.54, depending on which scout you talk to. Looked really good, threw the ball well. Of course, he's thrown to his own receivers and all of that. There's the obvious connection with the UW offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb and even Scott Huff there. My thought was when they made the Howell trade that it took them out of the quarterback market, at least high. The more I think about it, and this is just the way my brain works sometimes to a fault, could they still be in play for a Michael Penix, and in the process of doing so, essentially at minimum hedge, but maybe even guarantee in some sense of the word, as much as you can in football, that one of those two guys that you're set up for the future at that position, and then next year you're free to address all the other needs because you don't even have to think about it in a year when the quarterback class doesn't look that strong. Is he still in play potentially?
I think it's definitely still in play. I think it kind of comes down to, as much as anything, probably Grubb's assessment of Penix, which goes beyond, to me, the pro day doesn't almost matter at all in that. It just comes down to Schneider and Grubb and their conversations where
he wasn't there.
Okay, Well, and that's why, to my point, he doesn't need that information. You know,
Right.
I mean, he's been coaching the kid for 2 years. So what does he need to see? He knows how fast he is. He knows what he can do. And he's given we don't know where that assessment is between John and Grubb. I mean, it could be him saying, look, he can't throw on the move. It's just, that's the way it's going to work with him when he gets to the pro level. He can't deal with pressure. And so, no, we can't do that, John. My feeling on this, and I've been pretty hard on this for a while. I mean, I've been saying the Michael Penix is the top 20 first-round player for about 3 months. Well, a lot of people are still going, second, third-round guy. No, he's a first-round guy. You don't come out with this kind of productivity. He was hitting 19 miles an hour on the Senior Bowl, so you knew he was going to put up the good 40 time on that. He can make every throw in the book. I do like Penix a lot. I think the thing you have to give Michael Penix, it has to be, this comes with the Michael Penix experience, and that is that you build the offensive line up. You cannot give him the offensive line we have the past couple of years. Yeah. There's a lot just to unpack on what you brought up on by that way. I number one, off Geno, I'm a Geno supporter with him. I believe he played a lot better than fans are giving him credit for last year.
Same.
Three main markers stand out to me. You're 28th in pass protection last year, yet you had the 8th most efficient offense in the entire National Football League. And you had under a top 6th sack rate by Geno Smith. Yeah. Meaning that 28th worst pass protection, he was still getting you out of trouble and not making the worst thing happen, not throwing picks, not taking bad sacks, not having that stuff happen. And he was under that onslaught. He was under that deluge of pressure way too often. One of the reasons I say you give him an offensive line, I think he can be a 4,600 yard player from the quarterback position to be. He could be a top 7, top 6 quarterback in this offense. You've not given him a consistent ground game for the last 2 years, absent the first 11 games of not last year, but the year before. Pass protection's also gone out the door. And let's also add in that whole efficiency part, them being the 8th most efficient. Why didn't they put up more points? Being that efficient, because you had a defense that was living on the football field. Yeah. They played essentially on defense an extra game and a half this season in cumulative snaps by how long they were on that football field. To me, all this comes in tandem to say Geno's got some upside here as far as a player. If you can take care of points A, B, and C. I'm with you on the Sam Howell thing. I think that the trade happens because the Hawks are not anticipating that there will be a quarterback there at 16. I think that there's going to be 6 QBs taken here in the first 16 picks. Yeah. I know it's wild. I know it hasn't happened. I know I'm calling something that's, but you can feel the lurching of this draft moving this way. We've known for a while it's probably going to be 3 quarterbacks taken in the first 3 picks. And you have the Vikings hot to trot to either get up in there to 4 or to 5 there with the Chargers, which means we very well could be seeing this draft with the first 4 picks, 4 QBs taken. Yeah. There isn't a real good chance that 2 more then get taken between picks 5 onward, between 16, especially with those teams that could trade up to go take those QBs at that point. I think those guys go off the board. I think both Nix and Penix at that point are off. And so I think John was anticipating this with the Sam Howell trade. And I like Howell. I did as a player coming out of UNC. He was a guy in his sophomore year that lit it up. And he was doing it in a spread-based system, goes to a new offensive system into his junior year, which changes everything. He loses 4 playmakers to the draft. Mm-hmm. And between those 2 combinations, still puts up 3,000 yards, runs for almost 1,000 yards in his final year in college, right? When they hadn't done any of that and probably been like a 200-yard guy a year in that prior. He can move. He's got the big arm that he gives you. Threw for 4,000 yards in his first starting year while he was having to lead the league in attempts because his defense was pretty much the worst in all of football. I think there's some upside with Sam Howell. And I think they read the room here on this being, hey, those 6 guys are gone. And now it's Spencer Rattler and then Jordan Travis and then Joe Milton way down the line. And he went, I don't want to stretch for things. I mean, you mentioned like how fans were kind of dry on a little bit for offensive line in the first round. And I think I would push back against fans thinking this a little bit and understanding John Schneider 2 years ago changed up his strategy. And he's told us over and over again that he did it. We don't have to guess on this. He's been in countless interviews saying, this is what we did differently. Because they asked him, man, 2022, what did you guys did draft? Where'd that come from? Yeah. Last year, wow, where'd that come from? I mean, you guys in 16, 17, 18, you guys are reaching for need right and left. Need right and left. Now you guys are just, everything's do. And he said, I'm going from value standpoint. So if you walk into a draft saying in the first round, we got to take a guard. You walk into a draft in the first round, say we got to take a quarterback. You're not operating from value. You're not operating from that place that brought them this great success over the past 2 years in the drafts. And I think that to do that, you got to stay in that lane of value. And it ain't easy. Sometimes you're picking a right tackle at 16 that's a blue chip prospect when you already got Lucas sitting there on the books. But to me, That's what great teams do that continue to keep that consistent point of success and then build elite teams, actually, is that's the place they draft from as much as they can. Like you said at the top with John and factoring that need stuff in a little bit, it has to come in a little bit. Like you said, when we get to later in the draft, we start to go a little more for, need in the 5th, 6th, 7th round. Totally get that. But the more you can hang in that, devout, it's just as much as you say that devout role of staying value, I think you find ultimate success in each given draft if you can.
Well, then you have to look at combinations too. And what I look at every time I do these draft simulations is whenever I go offensive line early, because we have to address interior defensive line at some point too. We hear Mike Macdonald talk over and over again about how he wants to build a run wall and be stout up front. You've mentioned how they need to get a little bigger on the edges. And, Jaron Reed's not getting any younger. We don't know really what Cam Young is or how he'll fit or what he can contribute. And the fact they had to go out and get Jonathan Hankins, I think might be a little bit of a sign of how they feel about that. But whenever I go offensive line early, and then all those picks go by and I have to watch the second round and most of the third round pass by like you're watching a parade, I never like what's left on the defensive line after that. And so I tend to go defensive front early. With that in mind, are you a Newton guy, a Murphy guy? Are there some of the edges? I know you've already mentioned Jared Verse. Who are some of your favorite guys that you think are fits on that defensive line early on?
Well, it's looked at as a 3-4 defense, but it's really a 4-down lineman defense. Yeah. If you look at the way the Ravens ran their snaps. And I think that's an important part because the personnel you look for a 3-4 versus a 4-down liner is staunchly different. I also think it changes a little bit of the view of the need of it. Rather than 3, you need 2. It's kind of the way I look at saying it on that. And the reason I say this is I might run a little bit in disagreement with you on the need for a 3 tech. You just gave Leonard Williams a $22 million deal. You have Draymond Jones on an $18 million deal. Those are both 3 techs. You have then behind them Mike Morris coming back, who has familiarity with Mike Macdonald back to Michigan. And when he met him on coming through doing the meetings, he specifically targeted out Mike Morris. And he's like, we're going to do some great things. Now, maybe he moves Morris back to that hard edge and turns him back into that, and that we transition him inside. Yeah. But it still wouldn't make it at that point to me a point of priority to go get a third 3 tech on the roster versus an interior guard or a Mike linebacker. So I'm a little bit different in my outlook of that. I think with the 1 tech, it gets tangy. And I think what John's done here is it's a little bit like the Sam Howell situation, in that he's showing you and acknowledging to you there's Tavondre Sweat and there's McKinley Jackson. Yeah. And then who's a nose tackle, Dan?
Yeah, so there aren't many in this draft, and even it's a massive fall off from Sweat.
Massive. And so you come into that spot looking at it from the outside in and see, what do you want to do? Do you want to stretch for the position that's thin?
And yeah, to your point, you're not going to get Sweat because he's a second rounder, right? Absolutely. He's going to fall firmly into that black hole, and you're not going to get there.
Well, let's just say that. Let's say you trade back and you're in the second round. Okay. Let's say you move back to 25 of the Packers. They've got extra picks in the second round. Yeah. You do get that second rounder back. Okay. Well, if you're looking at having a guy like Junior Colson, who might be the best middle linebacker in this draft, Edgerrin Cooper, depending on whatever your flavor is, some people like him more. Are you going to go with that? Or are you going to take Tavondre Sweat to be your third nose tackle on this team? Yeah. And now Tavondre Sweat eventually becomes your starter. Tavondre Sweat eventually ascends. But is it as much when you're measuring those two, and that need part comes into it a little bit, and look, maybe you do go Tavondre. I have in certain drafts. I've done that whole thing where I flip back. There's times I'll take a Colson or there's times I'll take a Tavondre Sweat. But you have to do it there if you do. And it's then a decision of one or the other. Is it Tavondre Sweat or is it the guard? Do you want to go get Cooper Bebe or Tavondre Sweat? And well, it gets hard for me to what I'm trying to say is it gets hard for me myself to pull the Tavondre Sweat deal. Cause I just keep coming back to, I'm doing this for need. I'm doing this cause we need a nose tackle and there's not many nose tackles. So I got to grab him now. It's like that feeling, I think that's the bad instinctual place that you get from a team standpoint in drafting when that's what's driving you versus just who's the pure guy you got on the board and then measuring a little bit of that need at such a minor little level on that, especially on those higher picks, in my opinion. But I could see him taking Tavondre. Don't get me wrong. I like him and you could see how that could fit in there. I do think though, with signing Hankins like they did, I think they're showing you to me that they're going to more look for maybe an edge, but it'll be more of the 3 guys I said, the 3 tech, and then these 3 guys on your inside. That's 6 interior defensive tackles at that point, and you kind of roll with that, I think, when it's all said and done.
And then when it comes to that linebacker position, let's talk about that. They go out and they sign Terrell Dotson and Jerome Baker on 1-year deals. Move on from Bobby Wagner, let Jordyn Brooks walk in free agency. Some fans don't like the explanation that they were working on Williams and missed out on that opportunity. It might just be at the end of the day, they just didn't think he was a great fit.
You're not buying that, right?
Right. No, not at all. That doesn't happen. The agent calls, he says, hey, we got an offer. Schneider says, hey, can you just hang tight for a second? Let's talk about that for a second, because I want to ask about Jamal Adams too, and then we'll talk about the linebackers. Sometimes I think fans lose sight of the fact they try too hard to parse these comments, right? And they jumped all over Schneider. A lot of them did for that comment. Like, what do you sleep at the wheel? You're going to let your first-round draft pick linebacker walk away, and then you've probably gotten a lot of this too, and then sign the guy that they cut in order to get Brooks, which is not the way it went down. Schneider is a nice dude, right? I've interacted with him a ton personally. It's who he is. It's his nature. And these comments he makes sometimes that fans misconstrue as, hey, there's still a chance. The door's open. He doesn't throw guys under the bus. He's nice. And I think we saw that with Jordyn Brooks. I think at the end of the day, their evaluation was he's not versatile enough. We need, like you said, these interchangeable parts. I think we're seeing the same thing with Jamal Adams now. This just won't go away. We still see the smoke that someone speculates that he might come back. They asked Schneider about it. He kind of offhandedly says, yeah, we considered it as a linebacker, but we've moved on. But then Macdonald sort of stokes the fire last week by saying it's under consideration. Can we just move past this, or do you still think the door is open for him to come back in some sort of specialized role?
I don't see it myself. Jamal just doesn't have an ability to cover in space, and you're going to ask it. You're not just ask him. I mean, the Ravens scheme wasn't blitz heavy, so you can't just go, well, we'll have the blitz heavy scheme and just have them come in and do that. They don't. It's not. They blitz some, but it ain't going to be blitz central with Jamal going crazy at that point. And some people saying, well, we'll play linebacker. He's had shoulder problems in addition to having a variety of other problems and ailments. I don't know how good. In the past, I've heard from football players that you got the shoulder injuries and you're in more high contact, taking on guards that are coming and climbing down to you on the second level, that's not the best for keeping your health. He's also a little light to pull that off, in my opinion. I just don't see the fit with Jamal as far as, or why it makes any kind of real sense in this defense. Brooks the same way. Yeah, you're right. I mean, with Brooks, I've been harping on this for a few years and people didn't like to hear it, but going back and scouting him heavily in college, he came out in college draft day. I kind of crapped all over the pick on draft day. I said, you're drafting a guy to be a will linebacker, play him out of position for his first 2 years. Number one. Yeah. Number two, he can't cover. And this is a very important part to understand with Jordyn Brooks, a man that's given up 2,400 yards through his first 5 years while missing a lot of games, a good amount of games during that time period. And when you went to college, you saw him in his own drops, just not picking anybody up.
Yeah.
And so everybody at the time tells me, well, no, he's playing a spy role. That's what's going on. It's a spiral. Why he's not, 80 snaps in coverage, not one pass breakup, and fine. It's a spiral. Schneider says, oh, I heard Bucky Brooks, my former scout, today on the telecast, on the draft telecast, that, the kid can't really cover, he just needs to go back and look at his junior year of film or his sophomore year of film. Right.
Yeah,
so I go clickety clack. I click down on the sophomore fifth and I go, okay, maybe I was missing something. Let me go back to his prior year and look at this. And, he's playing as an outside linebacker and as a 3-4 defense the prior year. So you're going, okay, and he's running man flat situations off of a wide 9 technique as an outside stand-up linebacker a lot of the time. So it's like, okay, well, yeah, he's in man situations, non-zone, not a middle linebacker dropping, it just wasn't there. And it was never going to come there with Brooks. There was never a point that was going to improve with him. It wasn't there in sophomore year, wasn't there in junior year, wasn't here through the first few years in Seattle. And to pay money for that hole to be so big in his skill set, Schneider just couldn't do it. And like you said, Schneider's not going to be throwing the bus and be like, hey, the guy can't cover. I ain't spending $8 million a year for that, which is the true answer.
Yeah.
That's the real answer here.
Well, and I think fans lose sight of the fact sometimes that teams approach free agency very, very similarly to how they approach the draft, and that they have boards and they have a pro personnel department that's grading players and looking ahead and who's going to be available and who's, looking at contract issues, who might be released, and ranking them and grading them in much the same way as they do the draft. And so when when you find out that Jordyn Brooks is going to get $8.75 million a year, I think was the AAV, you're judging that against your grade of that player, how you feel about that player, and what else is available. And they probably already had Terrell Dodson, Jerome Baker, and some other guys graded a certain way, right? It all, I think there's a perception out there sometimes with fans that they just, okay, well, we lost him. Let's throw darts at a dartboard. Who's next? And they're making it up as they go along. And I just think, I think there's a lack of understanding that there's a bigger plan in place than that.
There is. And I think that there's onus, to your point with that with Dodson and Baker, of there was an onus on their coverage abilities. When you look at what they did, there was more of a, we need this to be a part of your game and you can do, and both of them bring that to the table. Which I think just it adds more, to it. I agree. I think sometimes the fans, which is a good instinct to love the players, and I wouldn't push fans away from wanting to do that. That's what we should be doing, is celebrating them. But we just don't want to. We also want to make sure we're accurately looking at each player in the right light. And there's sometimes where these players get viewed in a way that's not really accurate to the performance on the field. I had people trying to tell me last year that somehow Brooks had a better year than Bobby Wagner did last year. By what metric?
Yeah.
By what metric?
Yeah.
So it's just, it was what it was with that a little bit, but you got to slide away from this stuff. And I think you're right. They did measure it up first, what you could get value wise, not giving a multi-year deal. I think some of this we haven't talked about is setting the stage for 2025, that, your cap situation, if you look out to 2025, kind of coming into this offseason, I think we started out 28th for available cap space for 2025 at the beginning of this offseason. And so a lot of the moves, I think, have been both to pare down for next year's cap, take the full Jamal Adams dead money hit this year rather than spread it into 2 years. And so you're setting that stage to kind of, I think, get that done and bleed that all out. But you also had to make sure you had to be careful, because if you did do a Jordyn Brooks multi-year deal, well, you're going from 28th to 30th.
Yeah.
31st in cap space. And the thing that I've been trying to push back on people looking for the Hawks to go a little bit wild and crazy in free agency this offseason is, how mad are those same people that are pounding the drum saying, sign this guy, or let's go get this done? Would you not be the same people that would then be mad a year from now when the Hawks are facing down the barrel of no cap space, but then they're in the position theoretically to go for it, to be a contender? And I think that's why I'm very supportive of what we've done, because I get the plan on that. It's hard for a first-year coach to come in and make these many changes across the board and have first-year success where you're going to a Super Bowl. Much more likely they'll be ready to hit by 2025. And they've set the stage now with this offseason and these one-year deals and shedding the bad money to allow for that to happen, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I think linebacker's the best example of that. They sign what looks to be two very, very good starters, one ascending, kind of a younger player, just sort of at the beginning of his career arc, and then Jerome Baker, just a guy who's been steady Eddie every year. He's kind of played both positions and multiple schemes, and is a revered guy by his former coach and teammates. But 1-year deals. We really don't have anyone in that linebacker room who's on a long-term contract. And so, looking at the draft this year, you've already mentioned a couple of names that are going to fall into that hole that they might not have a shot at. Junior Colson, Edgerrin Cooper, Peyton Wilson's another guy that fits into that kind of that range. So as you look to when the Seahawks actually do have some picks compiled, and a lot of the experts have said this isn't a great linebacker class. And I tend to agree in the sense that there are only those three names that we're talking about, and none of them are going to go in the first round. Although Wilson gets a little bit of first round buzz sometimes in some of these mocks. But yet there's a lot of variety in this class, and there's a lot of shapes and sizes and flavors. Are there some guys that you like that you would think would fit, given those parameters that you've already outlined, that they have a realistic shot at later in the draft?
Yeah, I think what helps them a little bit is the fact that this defense leans into the inside linebacker trend of going lighter, right? 20 years ago, 240, 245 was what you want your Mike or Will to be right around. Yeah, now we're seeing guys, they're 225. We're seeing a lot of these 227 guys at the combine. Yeah. You're like, whoa, we had one guy at 210 this year.
They're listed at 235. I saw this a lot, and I thought, okay, maybe this class is better than last year. And then they show up at the combine and they're 221.
Totally. I think what's good is that there's been some good track record of guys like JOK with the Browns recently that have been these guys coming out at that 225 mark, a little lighter coming out of college, that did find success at the pro level. I think you're right that it's not a strong inside linebacker draft. I wouldn't say that. Once you get past those guys that you mentioned, the top three being Wilson, Cooper, and Colson, there are still some guys, though, that later on I think could fit in this defense and you could become starters in this defense and good players for you. Cedric Gray, North Carolina linebacker, very athletic. They've met with, I believe it is Nathaniel Watson. I think that this is the guy that they met with out of Mississippi State. Yeah. He's an inside linebacker. He's kind of meat and potatoes. There's nothing exciting about him. He just gets the job done. There's a few of those linebackers in this draft. If you drafted, they can do everything you need them to do the defense. They're not going to give you maybe star quality potential, but they'll be fine. Edifon Olafosio out of our own UW here.
He's had a good draft process.
He's had a really good draft process. He would be a real fit with his physical profile. There's guys watching Darius Masao out of UCLA last night. Him and Jeremiah Trotter, both very similar players, kind of squatty body inside linebackers that can really cover. That again, you look for those cover set guys. I think if we're looking a little lighter, a little bit of maybe guys fleet of foot, rangy, they can get to all the places on the field you need them to get. So those would be a couple of guys. There's some guys I'm not as high on. I like Eichenberg. I don't like Maurice Liafu out of Notre Dame. I'm not a big fan of the Ohio State Steel Chambers kid. But there's some functional guys in here too. Down the line a little bit, I think, like Jalen Ford. You get a Jalen Ford in the 5th round out of Texas, maybe one of the best coverage linebackers in this draft. Maybe fits to maybe more of a Will than a Mike at the pro level, which. That'd be a fit here. So that'd be a guy that'd be great value into the day 3 kind of place. I think you get him at maybe, who'd absolutely be, I think, awesome.
Let's finish with this. It sounds, when you take a sort of context of everything that you've just laid out and how you feel about this draft class, the Seahawks sit at 16 and they don't pick again until the end of the 3rd round. They only have one day 2 pick. If you had to pick one direction or another right now, you stick at 16 and take a blue chip player if he's there. Or if the opportunity presents himself, are you trying to pick up more picks in that range so you can get into more of the meat of the draft, which you have described as kind of between 16 and 70?
I think if the blue chips guy's there, and it's one of my 10 blue chip guys that are on the board, I think you've got to bite on it at that point. I do, because it's hard to get that talent. It's hard to find that elite talent, be it free agency or to trade for it. And so if you get your chance to have something fall in your lap and you benefit basically from those quarterbacks taking, you got to do it. But when it comes down to anything outside of that, if we're talking about, well, what's the better path here? Dallas Turner or, Tavondre Sweat and Junior Colson, and I keep running that, and I'd love to hear what you think on this, but I keep running those scenarios through, and you can kind of you can insert any kind of names you want on that, right? Like you can kind of put any little name in it. Well, this guy here at 16 or this and this. And it's very hard for this and this to not be outweighing that 16 guy if he's not the blue chip guy. Yeah. I like Turner. I like Verse. Don't have him as blue chip graded guys. I don't. And so I'm driven more to that trading back because I think that really John's got to be trying to look to target this tier 2 range and trying to get as many picks in this tier 2 as he can. I'd love to trade back twice. I'd love to do a 16, 25, 26s to Green Bay. He's got multiple 2nd round picks. Right. Go 26 to like 2. And then see if you get the extra 2nd, the extra 3rd, and maybe an early 3rd at that to move back. And then you've really got a good collection in that tier 2 range now. And you're coming out of this draft with 4 starters, I think, easy at that point, which would help this team out, especially because I think it'd be players that fit the scheme so well for what you need.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think with a new regime and a new scheme and everything else, you want to throw as many resources at the coaching staff as you can to see what sticks. And then you go into next offseason, as you've pointed out, and then you can kind of tighten things up, right? And focus more on some specific things. It's just hard to find partners. I think Green Bay's a natural one that I almost always make that trade because their extra picks, first of all, they exceeded expectations last year, really good up and coming team, but yet youngest roster in the league last year. I don't think they want to add 11 more rookie contracts to that. Yeah. I think they're going to target impact more and quantity or quality over quantity. But beyond that, it's tough to envision because the quarterbacks are all going to go. You're not going to have that guy fall into the end of the 1st round that maybe someone that missed out is going to want to jump up and get, so they get the 5th-year option. That hasn't happened in a while anyway, and it doesn't seem like it's going to happen this year. It's tough to find a match. I mean, Washington has extra picks. Maybe they don't want to be too young. I don't know. It's tough. I said that was the last question, but one thing
the Green Bay thing I'll say too is they have in recent years with Schneider in the 1st round traded with the Seahawks twice to move up in the 1st round in recent history. And they, as you said, they have those extra picks. The thing that I've wondered about, you're right about the quarterback, but the one thing that will do to get the person to trade up, there's got to be the player there that's really nice that they're like, ooh, oh my God, this guy's there. And you very well could be seeing the best corner in the draft at that pick. Maybe Romo Odunze as the third receiver falls in there, and a Packer team goes, look, we could use a true number one blue receiver. These other guys we got are kind of good number twos, but we need a number one in here. A Brock Bowers, who I know a lot of people are anticipating is going to go higher, but it's tangy. It's
if he falls to 16, that could be some leverage for the Seahawks.
That's what I'm thinking will happen, is that there's going to be that benefit to Seattle, be it either they pick the blue chip guy that lands in their lap, or there's the team that falls in love with one of their considered blue chip players that's landed in our lap that then they will move up for. And you're right. This is always hard to predict. And that every year we have certain years in drafts where teams are just like, we ain't moving up for nothing, and then there's other years where everybody's bouncing left and right. So it is hard to predict on this, but I do think you're going to probably have a tried partner, because just that benefit of those quarterbacks, so many QBs taken like we've never seen before, will push that good talent down in this draft into your spot. And you really sit in a bit of a pole position you wouldn't normally sit in at number 16. What would you rather do? If you've got one of what would be a blue chip guy for your list and you're sitting there at 16, are you heavily driven enough to want to trade back? Or do you do essentially a little bit like what I do and just jump on the blue chipper?
I just don't. It's a great question. I was going to ask you the same one to kind of end on, like to put your stamp on a name. I don't have one. There isn't a guy that I don't even think there's a guy that could fall that would realistically fall that I think is worth sticking and picking at 16 for. That, like, the old now I can't remember the name, but the Draft Day movie with the yellow piece of paper in his pocket. No matter what, right?
No matter what, right?
Yeah. I don't have a no matter what guy. And so I'm always looking for that value, because I'd love to get, 4 players in the top 100. I mean, that would take some pretty aggressive trading back, but I don't like the idea of only getting 2 of them. So yeah, I'm looking to move back.
I totally get it. It's just for me.
Pick 4.
Fuanga, Mims, Bowers, Odunze. Any of those ones, I know this is going to be a bit of a one that hits out of left field, but Quinyon Mitchell would be very tough.
Yeah.
I think he's the best corner in this draft.
We didn't talk about corner, so let's do that. We got some time.
I'm okay, man. I'm not rushed. It's Friday. I'm chilling.
I mentioned on my last show that, trying to tell people that, like, be ready for surprises for a number of reasons, right? One is what we've talked about today, that Schneider has done what he always does, and he has gone out and used free agency to basically hedge everything and put himself in a position to where he can let the draft come to him. And so, especially with a new coaching staff, rooms and position groups that we think are set as fans, they might not agree. Not enough anyway to pass on a guy that they think can be a potential star for them.
That's right.
And I think corner is maybe the best example of that philosophy, that they brought back the entire group literally intact, even bringing back Artie Burns on a veteran minimum deal and tendering Michael Jackson. You have the exact same group, and it's a group that was widely seen as a strength of the roster going into last year. But yet there's a question of how they're going to use Devin Witherspoon. There seems to be this assumption that because Macdonald had so much success using a real dynamic slot and moving Kyle Hamilton kind of into that role, that Witherspoon would repeat that sort of dual role that he did so well as a rookie. I'm not so sure. Macdonald also wants to lock guys down on the outside. We've signed some other guys that are versatile that can play that slot. There may be more of those in the draft. He may prefer to keep Witherspoon on the outside. If there's a corner there that they think, very similarly to Devin Witherspoon last year, is just a dog, then I think it would blow people away. Maybe of all the position groups, it might be the one that would blow the most fans' minds. But I could absolutely see them take a corner, especially because, like you said, if the run on quarterbacks is followed by a run on tackles and then a run on those receivers, or vice versa, that cornerback group is a good one this year, and that might be the group that gets pushed down.
Yeah, I think I'm 30 draftable grades on corners so far on my outlook, and I've still got about 10, 15 more to go. So it's like receiver. There were 40 receivers at the combine. So there's a lot there. Yes, you're on the right button with this, in my opinion, on this. So let's just unpack this. I think that there's probably 2 cornerbacks that would be really in play at 16 for Seattle. I know people like Woolen, and I'm not shading Woolen. You've got to be able to tackle from the corner position in this scheme. That remains a question mark with Woolen. It's something that could develop with time, but it remains a question mark. For instance, if you wouldn't shock me if you were to, let's say, take a cornerback with the first overall pick, and then maybe you move Woolen for a third rounder on draft day.
Yep.
So Quinyon Mitchell has been the top graded cornerback by PFF over the past 2 years. He has ball skills for days. He will take the ball away at the next level, no doubt about it. And he went out and put up remarkable testing numbers out of the combine, running a 4.3. So it's everything fit together with him. When you watch him on tape, when you watch him going up against Marvin Harrison Jr. in this draft, don't let the Toledo aspect confuse you. The kid is sticky as it gets in coverage. He's as dynamic. He's twitchy, stop and start, everything you could want for it. To me, he's going to be a great player. He's actually, just full disclosure, he is my one blue chip defensive player. Every other blue chip grade I have in this draft is 3 QBs, 3 receivers, Fuanga, Mims. Quinn Mitchell's my only one. The other guy that's interesting that the Hawks did meet with or been talking to, the other guy that could come out of that, this is the left field one that I think would hit fans like nobody's really anticipating this one, but is very much in play. That's Cooper DeJean out of Iowa.
Okay. Really versatile.
Very, very versatile. So previous year, not this last year, but the year prior, they used them all over the place. Sam linebacker, box safety, outside corner, single high corner. And he had a bunch of picks, right? He was ball hawking all over the place, but it didn't really suit him too much because he wasn't being given a position. They fitted him out to outside corner this last year, and they let him roll. No more moving you all over the place, but he still brings that flexibility background. We come back to what we talked about at the head of this in the Mike Macdonald defense, versatility and flexibility. I can take this outside corner and I can turn him into a Sam post snap. I can take this outside corner and I can turn him into a free safety post snap. And he's comfortable in that role. Not that I'm moving in there. He's like, hey, what do I do? You know, but he actually understands from a purposeful angle of how he needs to go and where, you know, what he needs to do movement wise on the play. So full meal deal skill set with Cooper DeJean, twitchy. He can tackle. He's a guy that I could see you flopping out potentially. That one for that kind of player would make a lot of sense. And I think those are the two guys that are maybe in play there at 16. Not saying they're going to jump on him, but it wouldn't completely make my brain fall out of my skull cap if you pick
interesting. He's kind of flown under the radar this draft season. He hasn't been able to test much. He's coming off a surgery, I think, right? And he's slowed down a little bit. I thought you were going to go when you were kind of leading up with the dramatic build up to that reveal. I thought you were going to go Ennis Rakestraw because I see maybe not the top end speed there, but I see a little bit of Witherspoon on tape and with his mentality and interviews and things like that. I thought maybe he was the guy you were going to name drop on us.
I like Rakestraw. I do have a second round grade on him though, so not quite as high. I've got 4 first round grades: McKinstry, Kool-Aid, and Terry and Arnold's kind of begrudgingly, because he's.
Do you like McKinstry better than Arnold?
I do.
Okay.
Arnold's
flip flopped. It seems like on most big boards.
Yeah. Well, I think Kool-Aid's had some issues with testing too. So he's had some same kind of thing like with Cooper, where he's not been able to do as much. Terrian's I've got a few people I reach out to after I watch the tape on this. I've got friends that are, played cornerback position. And so I lean on them at times. I got a feeling on this. You watch this. I might even say that I have a feeling. I watch that cornerback that gets trash. So he's way too grabby.
Yeah.
Way too panic grabby, way too at the college level. You know this. It's just these corners get away with that hold way more than they do at the pro level. And some guys can make the transition away from that. But as athletic as he was on his pro days, good a mover as he is in space, on his tape, there's just way too much holding on there versus McKinstry, who's more of McKinstry's like that cornerback for the Saints. Help me out. What's that kid's name that they've had there for a while? They paid him money and he was a former, I think, top 20 pick for them.
Yeah.
But he reminds me of kind of that guy. Just super sticky in coverage, going to be in the back pocket of every receiver, can play man for days.
Lattimore, is that who you're talking about?
Lattimore, yeah, that'd be the one on that. So he kind of reminds me of that. But Arnold's one that I'd almost want to, I mean, there might even be a scenario you could have me talk to take a Rakestraw over Arnold, to be honest with you, because it's just I didn't like the tape on that. I don't like that over holding crap on college. It's like, well, I can get away with this, so I'm just gonna, show me you covering. Trust your feet. You're supposed to be a good mover, be able to move.
Imagine if, last year at this time, we were battling the fan base with, the whole Devin Witherspoon idea, because the Seahawks never take cornerbacks high. Imagine if they went corner 2 years in a row in the first round. Some people would lose their minds.
People would get mad. I mean, I ran a mock with Quinyon Mitchell on mine, and I did all those mock scenarios. That was the one that I got a comment or two on. Like, they go corner with where our guard situation is. I will, right? And I'm like,
it's a fireable offense. right?
I
You hear
get
that a
it.
lot. I'm like, just take good players. Just take good players and figure it out at the end of the day.
Well, and what you want to do, what I think Mike Macdonald would love to do is kind of actually go away from a little bit of the stuff that the Ravens did last year to a degree. What I mean by that is he was brought in for Wink Martindale because Wink Martindale was a casino blitz machine. No. He was a guy that was like, he was Bruce Arians on defense, no risk it, no biscuit type stuff, right? And when he had his man-based cover corners on the outside that could hold up, the scheme worked, right? But you can't have always a lot of good man cover corners on your roster. You probably got 2 of them. And so when those guys get injured, he'd still be running the man-based concepts, the casino blitzes, but the guys on the outside can't cover, he gets hit. So they bring in Macdonald to go, okay, how can you change the scheme a little bit to where it's not as reliant on us having the cover corner guys out there. He built in more of the zone-based concepts, but there's always a bit of the drive to come back to that old lockdown cover corners on the outside. I go into my mind, if this is all Ryan defense going back, this is, if you go back to the, to the originations of it, you got a guy like Rex Ryan with the Jets at one time with Revis and Cromartie on the outside. Yeah. And what that allows you to do to be able to lock down on the outside. I mean, lock down on the outside. You're not getting free here. And then what you get to just as aggressive as you get to be then on the interior, on the inside, and what you get to conceptually run from that. I think it frees those defensive coordinators up in this kind of scheme in a real nice way that they really like. And I think Macdonald's a smart enough coach where he can get around it. If he doesn't have those cover corners, like last year, having a Ronald Darby that's got to go fill in for some time, like, okay, we'll stay in the zone. We'll keep them protected, but if I can drive back to some of that man-based stuff, and you've seen, I'm sure, the stats on even last year with guys like as tough as it was with Woolman in tackling, still great in man coverage situations, and Witherspoon still great in man coverage situations. We didn't run it. So, because Carroll was allergic to running man coverages with his corners, but they can do it. And I think he's going to be driven back to do it again. That's where I think grabbing a corner that can do that with what he's getting with Witherspoon on the other side, boy, that frees this defense up to really, really, really get aggressive up front at that point and trust those guys on the outside to be able to hold up.
That is Brandon Cain of the Hawks Nest, YouTube, Patreon, all over Twitter. Brandon, what are you working on for the channel?
I'm gonna actually do a Junior Colson video. So I'm working on. I think he's going to be a real live target. He's got the background with Mike Macdonald, having Mike Macdonald made him a freshman starter on that Michigan defense back in the day. So a guy that he's not a top end talent, right? There's a reason he is going to slide, I think, mid-second. But I think he fits to the defense with his skill set and what he's able to do and the variety of things he can bring to the table. And I think he's a real, just fun, natural football player.
And one of the youngest players in the draft too. So best days are ahead of him. I think he just turned 21, right?
I think and that's not about you, but that's become a bigger thing for me on the, like when I look at Alt or we talk about Jackson Powers Johnson or even this Colson, when I've got a guy that's at that 21, just turned 21, for some of these other older prospects, especially with the COVID stuff, that's at 24, 25 years old.
A lot of them.
I think you got to put that into your measurement and wait, with this guy, where he's at is not where he's ending out. And I've got to look at him and go, there's higher ceiling here to this guy. If he's this good, this young, especially if he's holding up at the college level this young versus these guys that are kind of grown men, there's a big difference, 2 to 3 years of age at that age, physically, I think. So that's a big draw for me too. When I see that age part of it, it's like, ooh, there's even more upside here. This is not a finished product and not even close.
Yeah.
Do you see it the same way?
Yeah, I do. And I think this is, we feel like we've been saying this for the last 2 years, but the consensus seems to be this is the last year we're going to see so many of these overage players. But you're right. I mean, it's hard to get a long-term deal in the NFL these days if you're 28 or 29. I mean, by that point, some of these guys are having to settle for 1-year deals. Jerome Baker may be one of the best examples of that. 27-year-old player in his prime who's had a good resume and put good years on tape, and he had to settle for a 1-year deal. If you're drafting a guy at 24 in the first round, especially with a potential 5th-year option, you're probably looking at a 1-contract player. And so, yeah, the idea of not that the Seahawks have a long track record of signing guys to second deals anyway, but maybe that's going to shift. Yeah, the idea of getting a guy younger when he's still ascending is attractive for sure.
It is. I mean, hell, I'm sure it's part of what made the Steelers feel so good about getting the deal done with the the Ravens linebacker that they signed from them, because they got him. He's only 24 years old.
Yeah.
So, still a guy you go, okay, well, then maybe there's still this upside is still as he's rounded. And it explains why he's like Patrick Queen, why he struggled the first 2 years, where you go, okay, well, he was that young guy in the first 2 years, maybe kind of playing that position to the middle linebacker. They move him to Will, and he gets a little bit older, and now he's hitting. So it's something to pay, I think, a keen amount of attention to on these prospects when they are that young.
They trade for Sam Howell, who's younger than half of the guys in this quarterback draft class.
I don't know if it's driven you crazy. It's kind of driven me crazy a little bit with the discourse on the Sam Howell thing, because there are people that are hot to trot for a QB in this draft. There are people that aren't as in on Sam Howell, but they go 21 interceptions last year, 65. Right. It's like, I had to leave the league in attempts. He was first year starting. It's like if you took any quarterback, I feel like, and you said, okay, this is going to be your first year starting, and you're going to lead the league in attempts. Yeah, like which quarterback in NFL history goes out there and does anything good under those conditions?
Now, some of the best quarterbacks we've ever seen play the game have thrown a lot more than 21 interceptions their rookie year with a lot less attempts. So,
right.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't get the finished product on him. You mentioned the age, 23 years old. He's got a lot more still as far as potential upside here. And he didn't come out of college he wasn't Mitch Trubisky with 1 year of production coming out of college. And not that he was even drafted as high as Mitch Trubisky. He didn't deserve to drop to the 5th round. He threw for almost 10,000 yards in college.
Yeah. And
especially those parameters we talked about, the change of the offense's final year, losing those 4 playmakers to the draft, all drafted the prior year. All 4 of those guys drafted the prior year in the draft, those big playmakers, and still didn't really miss a beat. First year starting this, didn't really miss a beat. Yeah, the interceptions. I look at it as more of like, I'm impressed more than with those just to 21 interceptions versus what you had than anything else. So he's got upside, man.
People are quick to put the 65 sacks on him too. And what I say to that is, when I watch, some of the games he played last year, it never got to him. It never changed his style. He didn't get jumpy. He didn't get, unsure with his feet. He didn't bail out of the pocket. What I saw more of was him standing in the pocket and getting drilled as he was, throwing 30-yard dimes downfield despite that. So, no.
The big time throws you mentioned, he led the league, I think, in big time throws last year. He was right up there.
Yeah. He was top 10, and yeah. Well, we'll see how that works out, and we'll see how the draft works out. Lots of good stuff today. I appreciate the time, and let's get you back on after the draft, and then we'll see how it matches up with some of your grades and some of the things you thought going into it. We'll know a lot more. I mean, each day we learn more about this coaching staff. We'll know a lot more about John Schneider's approach to running this organization on his own, essentially, and to the vision that Mike Macdonald has after this draft when we see what kind of players they target. So, Brandon, thanks for taking the time and coming on.
My pleasure, man. Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Be sure to check out Brandon's page, his YouTube channel, and keep an eye out for his live streams. I said he was prolific. He has more stamina than yours truly. He has done some live streams that run on for 4+ hours, and it is good stuff. His last one, in fact, if you go to his page now, he did it 3 or 4 days ago, where he ran through multiple live mock draft simulations in the same show. I think he ended up doing 4 of them, running through different scenarios to kind of give you an idea of how those things might look live in front of your face. Got some cool things coming up on the show. Sunday, going to catch up with Clinton Bonner of the Seahawkers podcast. We're supposed to be on earlier this week, but I wasn't feeling well. Sorry for that. Monday, Michael Thompson of 12th Man Rising will be joining me, and we're going to do dueling mock drafts of a little different flavor. He's going to do one with a quarterback. I'm going to do one without. Emery Hunt of CBS Sports and has just released his draft guide. He's been to all the All-Star games and done the whole offseason thing, has a long, long list of prospects that he takes a look at. He's going to be joining me. We're going to break this down even further. Jackson Bevins also will be joining me in the coming days, so keep an eye out for that. Until then, follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever and subscribe to the channel and the audio podcast. Until next time, I'm Dan. Forever and always, go Hawks.